Miss Riki set down her paper copy of Humanity's Bloodlust onto her desk, the question from one of her students having caught her off guard. "I'm sorry, can you ask that again?" she inquired, her mind racing to grasp the simplicity of the question. "Is there a reason why humans are so murdery?" the Jinn student asked, her mask embellished with engravings of flowers, her forearms resting on her desk. Miss Riki looked around the room, realizing that the question resonated with all her students. Their curious eyes mirrored the same inquiry. She had hoped they would take the short history lesson at face value, but the simplicity of the question demanded a more profound answer. Taking a deep breath, she decided to approach it head-on. "It is a difficult question to answer," she began, her voice measured. More so for the simplicity of it, she then took one of the new manufactured memory cache cards and plugged it into the data display on the wall, the display glowing to life with an image of two male human toddlers fighting with sticks. "Humanity may not be the most violent of the star's children," Miss Riki continued, "as I believe that award goes to the Demir. But they are by far the most violent within the Confederation." She pointed to the toddlers on the screen, their innocent play a stark contrast to the violent tendencies she described. While the Cleen and Yorel may be predatory evolutions, and the Jinn, Opticin, and Pooh prey evolutions, none of them appear to have the predatory drive of the humans. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. For the current predatory evolutions of society, it was merely a means to an end, and there are very few histories of Cake and Yorel taking a distinct pleasure in doing what they had to do in order to survive. She continued, "The Nemi, despite being a predator evolution, became extremely weepy when taking life, even under the most dire circumstances." A Carlin student spoke up, "They're the odd-looking plant lovers, aren't they?" Miss Riki nodded, acknowledging the comment with a slight smile. A point chuckled, adding, "They recently got into a bit of trouble with planting human peppers. Now they're black market oligarchs dealing in seeds, and they are still dealing with the loss of their livestock due to a simple mistake." Miss Riki nodded again, stepping out from behind her desk and smoothing down the sweater she was wearing. A gift from that wasn't important now. She focused on the task at hand. "What I am going to tell you is one of the reasons why a lot of members of the Cinderella Confederation are still wary of humanity, some even fearing humans despite having them on our side." She gestured to Ramira, who quietly shut the door to the classroom and pulled down the shutter. The Yorel student raised her butter yellow eyebrows but complied, closing the door and pulling down the slatted window blocker. Miss Riki's tone grew serious as she continued, "Humanity is still considered an alum third race." She paused, letting the gravity of her statement sink in before continuing, "They are helpful, charming, cheerful, and maybe some of the most loyal friends you will ever make. But there is a lot of darkness underneath that veneer." She pointed again to the children fighting on the screen, explaining, "Humans are ingrained biological warriors. Male children are known to wield wooden sticks as young as 3 years old, and even at younger ages, they are known to bite, kick, play punch, or attempt to grapple with their parents." The students were visibly shocked. A male Jinn student tilted his head, his voice curious rather than admonishing. "They try to wield fake weapons as young as 3. Miss Riki nodded, her expression somber. "Yes, and human parents often encourage it. They believe it builds a foundation of knowing when too far is too far, as well as courtesies and customs." Miss Riki continued to explain the nature of humans, shifting the display to show images of human children forming a skirmish line, giggling as they wielded trash can lids as shields and sticks as weapons. The sight of the children in makeshift armor and helmets made from cardboard boxes contrasted sharply with the innocence usually associated with childhood. This picture was taken by a PO visitor who was touring a few human cities. Miss Riki explained. He watched these human children make fake war, practicing teamwork and formations. Then, while traveling across a heavily wooded area, he came upon formations of human children wielding sticks like rifles and practicing tactical movement in the woods. The class was stunned. A female Yorel near the front, her black fur catching the light oddly, raised a hand to ask, "Why are children being taught these things?" "Children are meant to grow up free of combat, to fully develop in peace." Miss Riki shook her head, her expression thoughtful. "They aren't being taught these things, not formally. They learn them simply by watching and innately try to mimic them. Human children are drawn to such things naturally, and not even humans know why. They dub it rough and tumble play. And the majority believe it is extremely beneficial to human children as a whole." She paused before adding, "Now before you go asking too many questions, yes, there are many human cultures that encourage their children to play fight, pulling them apart just before it goes too far. The students murmured among themselves, clearly disturbed by this revelation. Miss Riki tapped the pad of her finger to her hand, and the display pulled up the next image, a detailed map of Earth, highlighting regions known as death worlds. The real question that a lot of us have been asking, Miss Riki said, drawing their attention back to her, is why Earth is considered a death world. And there has been a renewed debate on whether that is because of the planet itself or because of what lives on it. She paused, letting the question linger in the air. Thousands of years of wars have honed humans into the perfect predator, one that can break, tear, and kill when it feels the need to. Worst of all are the side effects. A Jin student, her arms crossed, asked, "Side effects? Isn't being able to kill easily a side effect on its own?" Miss Riki quickly tapped along her palm, pulling up an image of a notorious human serial killer, Ted Bundy. The display was filled with his cold, calculating face, a stark reminder of humanity's darker side. Assassins and the like are nothing new, Miss Riki continued, her voice measured. They kill for pay, and it is a profession. There have been very few serial killers among the races of the Confederation, usually marked as mentally broken people who are quickly eradicated. She turned her attention to a black-furred Ural student, Tyndall, who had perked up her ears. "Yes, Miss Riki," the student asked. "How many murderers has your kind had over the last, say, 500 years?" Miss Riki inquired. Tyndall closed her eyes, thinking deeply before responding. 3, 4, I think." "4 is right," Miss Riki nodded, her expression grim. "And how many have the Carlin had in the same time frame?" She asked, continuing to question each student, pointing out the drastically low number of serial killers among their races. The class was silent as the implications of Miss Riki's words began to sink in. Miss Riki folded her arms under her chest, her expression somber. "This is because we are not innately a murderous group of races. Yes, we all have our issues from time to time, but for the most part, we cannot be called bloodthirsty or murderous." She paused, letting the silence stretch before dropping the bombshell. Humans, in the last 500 years, have had over 10,000 serial killers just in the unified American states alone. And that is not even counting the European coalition. The students were horrified, their faces reflecting the shock of the numbers. Miss Riki continued, "Now, you may be asking yourself why they would kill like this. And yes, there are a lot of cases referring to mental breaks or other such problems of the self, as even our brains can short-circuit from time to time." She paused again, her expression darkening. "But you may also find it quite odd that during the war with the Daimir, these issues decreased among humans," Miss Riki said, her tone serious. A Jin student raised one of her forearms, her curiosity piqued. "It decreased?" she asked, incredulous. Miss Riki nodded, her expression grave. "It decreased," she confirmed, tapping her fingers along her palm to bring up images of humans engaging in brutal combat with the insectoid Daimir. The pictures showed hand-to-hand combat, gun battles, and scenes of devastation. When the humans had an enemy to fight and were fighting for a cause they saw as good or righteous, their serial killers dropped nearly 70%, along with a slew of mental and stress issues. If anything, many Interconfederation scholars believe the overall mood of humans rose significantly during the conflict. A male point student leaned back in his chair, looking up at the display. "They liked it," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Miss Riki nodded, her expression grim. "They did," she said softly. "They had no wars to wage upon themselves, as they were all too advanced, and it would lead to what one human put as an unsportsmanlike slaughter. They were spiking in mental health issues, with these random killings on the rise. Then came the Confederation, asking for their help. And they had a unified target to unleash their frustrations." Another student, Tintu, ran her clawed paw along her head, deep in thought. "Oh, I get it now," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Miss Riki looked at her with a knowing expression. "I believe you will all understand it quite soon," she said, her voice low, almost ominous. "Earth, this little blue marble we are hurling around in this station, breeds the finest predators to have ever touched the stars," Miss Riki continued, her tone dark. "Predators honed over tens of thousands of years of human-on-human conflict. Predators honing themselves on hunting and killing other predators. Even in times of peace, they kept about this practice, lawful predators hunting and capturing rogue predators that preyed on the local populace." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. The darkness coming out of them slowly, out of mental illness, boredom, or a simple desire to kill the room was silent, the students absorbing the gravity of what she was saying. My fellow scholars and I have identified 3 key types of humans, Miss Ricky said, tapping along her palm again, bringing up images of 3 different humans. The display showed a mother with a sad but defiant look on her face, a human soldier with a long scar along his cheek, and a smiling woman wearing an odd orange jumpsuit. First, there is the reluctant killer, Miss Ricky began, pointing to the sad woman. These humans can and will kill when pushed, though they are not outwardly predisposed as such. They are more in line with the rest of us. If their child is threatened, or themselves, they will lash out with wild, feral energy. They will then suffer mentally from the kill. But most get over it in time. A male opticien student raised a claw, his voice practiced and calm. These seem quite normal. I would have assumed that most of humanity is made up of this kind. Miss Ricky nodded thoughtfully. Less than what you would think, but yes, most, she mused, then pointed to the soldier. Most humans fall into this category, Miss Ricky explained, her voice steady. These kinds of humans are seen as actual predators and are judicial killers. They are not reluctant, nor do they like doing it, but they can easily kill once a set of protocols are broken. She paused, letting the gravity of her words settle in. Humans, despite what we think of them, have a rather simple set of rules they live by that keep them from killing. Once you break those rules, however, they will snuff out life without a second thought and not even lose sleep over it. To this kind of human, breaking their protocols makes you less than a beast, a monster requiring dealing with. The room was quiet, the students processing this unsettling information. A female opticien student finally broke the silence, raising a clawed hand. What kind of protocol? She asked, her voice tinged with unease. Miss Ricky's expression darkened as she responded. Hurting the innocent is the easiest protocol to break, she said, her voice heavy with meaning. To attack a non-combative woman, a mother, or a child is seen as the quickest way to activate a human and have them shed blood. The traffical incident is the best example of this. A Carlin student leaned back in his chair, letting out a small hissing laugh. Ah, yes, when a Loren trader slapped a human child for getting in his way, he recalled, his voice filled with disdain. From what I understand, a female human and 2 males fractured the Loren's skull to the point it looked like broken pottery. Another student, a red Ural, murmured, I believe they beat him to death. Miss Ricky nodded grimly. They did, she confirmed, her tone somber. Her fury was so fierce that they couldn't even pull the female human off of him. Tensions were a little high at that point. To be fair, Miss Ricky continued, but it made a lot of us shrink away from humanity as the war was winding down. She paused, letting the silence stretch before adding, there are other protocols, such as taking property, risking life of themselves, and other such things that are easily avoidable. Even more confusing is that many of their protocols are not attached to only humans, they expand to everyone and anything. The students were visibly disturbed by this revelation, their faces reflecting the unease Miss Ricky's words had instilled. Humans have been known to batter other races to near death over infractions to other races, such as the Premier Market incident, she continued, her voice steady but tinged with disgust, where a Waipal child was being harassed by a gang of Perfar traders. When a human caught wind of what was going on, Miss Ricky explained, he approached them and told them to leave the child alone. When they refused and kicked the child, he single-handedly brutalized all 8 of the Perfar. Then impaled the leader on the broken spike of a stall when she pulled a blade and tried to take the young Ural as a shield. The students were silent, their expressions a mixture of shock and horror. This is the first instance of an escalation of human protocols being seen in real time, Miss Ricky continued, as well as galvanizing the Waipal friendship with the humans. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then there are these, she said, pointing to the woman in the orange jumpsuit. These are murderers, serial killers, and dregs of human society. These are the rogue predators that hide amongst the first 2 types of humans, killing whatever they please for the pleasure of it, Miss Ricky continued, her voice tinged with disgust. These kinds of humans have been offered on loan for research, and their brains are terrifying. Killing, blood, organs, the screams of the dying, they are things of beauty to these kinds of humans and elicit the same kind of brain response as eating ice cream or watching a favorite movie. The class was silent, the horror of what Miss Ricky was describing sinking in. Company 13, a female Jin student said, under her breath. Miss Ricky confirmed with a quiet nod. Company 13, she repeated, her voice dark. The darkest mark on humans during war. Humanity, knowing their surplus of perfect predatory killers and desiring to empty their legions of jail cells, created Company 13, and we all got to see what happens when a human is honed to its sharpest edge. Murderers and serial killers armed with energy blades and other melee weapons, along with armor, were sent in suicide-charging waves, Miss Riki continued, her tone grim. They decimated the daimyo, cackling and howling as they did. While the regular military forces of the humans mopped up behind them, the display now showed images of the carnage left in the wake of Company 13's assault on the daimyo's secondary capital planet. This person, Amanda Jute, is one of the few survivors of Company 13 and recalls all her memories of slaughter fondly. Miss Riki explained, her voice tinged with disgust. There are other survivors that managed to steal daimyo ships, and only a small handful made it past the human anti-air units. The class was silent, the students absorbing the gravity of what they were hearing. So there are loose among the stars, then a female point student sighed out, this little handful of feral humans. For the most part, they hide well, Miss Riki replied, her tone heavy, which is terrifying in and of itself. That is what really troubles the Confederation. She paused, letting the silence stretch before continuing. The last two types of humans blend in seamlessly with normal society. You will never know you're near one unless someone breaks a protocol or they decide to kill you. The class was quiet, the weight of Miss Riki's words hanging heavily in the air. Humanity's cold calculation and combat strategy did away with nearly 95% of its prison-held murderers. But that does not mean they are all gone, Miss Riki said, her voice tinged with resignation. No, that was only the ones they had caught, the ones that had gotten sloppy. She paused, her expression grim. What all of you may not know is that there is a shadow war ongoing with humans. The judicial predators trying to sneak and snuff out the rogue predators before they can do too much damage, or to stop them altogether, Miss Riki explained. Worse is that these rogue predators can hide anywhere. The class was silent, the tension in the room palpable. What are you trying to say, Miss Riki? A blue opticien student asked, her voice trembling slightly. Miss Riki drummed her nails along the top of her desk, deep in thought. Finally, she stood up fully, facing her students. The reason why the Confederation is so scared of humans now, after the war, why you are in this class with no humans present. She began, her voice steady, is that they want to arm you with knowledge. Humans are, for the most part, good people with big hearts and a lot of love to give. But there is a dark shadow over them that looms in the day and night. Judicial human predators and rogue human predators are seamless, hiding in plain sight, Miss Riki continued, her tone grave. There is estimated to be hundreds of thousands of rogue predators lying in wait, or so clever that they have yet to even be found. Miss Riki said, her voice growing softer but no less intense. There is estimated to be millions of judicial predators walking amongst you, and a simple mistake will set them off onto a path of bloodshed. Earth, for all its beauty, has created two of the most perfect predators to ever grace the stars. And their savagery is unmatched. Most terrifying of all is how calm they are when they go about their business, as if the act of killing is just another part of their nature. The students were silent, processing the weight of Miss Riki's words. Finally, one of the point students, her fully colored blue eyes narrowed, asked, "Then why not get rid of them? Why not go through with you and other psychic races and root out the problem?" Her voice was firm, yet there was a hint of desperation in it, as if she sought reassurance in the possibility of a solution. Miss Riki gave a faint, almost sad smile, shaking her head. "You would think so," she replied, "but they hide just as well there as they would on the sidewalk. Humans are immune to mental interdiction, and they are instantly aware of it as well. The more clever rogue humans even lay down false trails that lead us on a merry chase." She sighed, the frustration evident in her voice. A crack team of investigators tried but found themselves outclassed by even the reluctant humans, shutting them out as if they slammed a door. This made the Confederation so afraid that many began to wonder if we had accidentally opened a box that we can't shut again. The thing hidden inside bursting out and wrapping itself around us. The room was heavy with tension, the students' faces reflecting their growing unease. Miss Riki looked at them, her expression serious. "What we have to do, what all of you have to do, is understand who is walking with you, who is eating with you, and who you are talking to." Just as she was about to continue, a dull chime rang around the room, signaling the end of the class. Miss Riki sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "We will pick up on this later," she said, her voice tinged with regret. Class dismissed. The students slowly picked up their belongings, their minds clearly still occupied with the disturbing revelations they had just heard. They filed out of the classroom in silence, the usual chatter replaced by a heavy, thoughtful quiet. As they left, two Ural students, Rear and Tindall, walked side by side, their brows furrowed in deep thought. Tindall bumped her shoulder into Rear, snapping her out of her reverie. "I figured it out," Tindall said smugly, squeezing next to Rear as a Karen slithered by. Rear rolled her eyes, not in the mood for Tindall's games. "Figured what out?" she asked, her voice flat. Tindall grinned, gesturing towards her chest with her pod hands. "The odd smell, the one we both smelled in yesterday's lesson about the Demir War." Tindall replied, her voice filled with a sense of accomplishment. "It was all over Miss Ricky's sweater, and I know what it is." Rear blinked, waiting for Tindall to continue. When Tindall saw that Rear wasn't going to play along, she leaned in closer and whispered, "Human." Rear's brows raised, though she was less impressed than Tindall had hoped. "Very curious," Rear said, her tone nonchalant. "From what I've heard from my sister, their smell gets all over the place. How do you know it wasn't sold by a human from a store? It would smell like a human that way too." Tindall growled in frustration, her smugness deflating. "It smelled like a male human," she insisted, her tone more serious now. "That has to mean something." Rear smirked, though she wasn't entirely dismissive of Tindall's theory. "Means the traitor must have been human," she agreed, though her tone was still more curious than convinced. Tindall muttered something under her breath, clearly annoyed that Rear wasn't giving her the reaction she wanted. "How's your sister anyway?" Rear asked, changing the subject as they walked. "Oh, she's still down there playing with the humans," Tindall replied, her tone brightening a little. "I think she said something about cones or something like that. It sounded fun though." Rear nodded, unwrapping a piece of earth chewing gum from its foil wrapper and popping it into her mouth. "Our parents sent me some credits to buy her some new boots and such. I'll be dropping down over the weekend to see her," she said, her tone casual. Tindall chuckled, the earlier tension dissipating as they chatted. "You may want to pack her some bandages too, or some reactive healing pads," Tindall teased, her voice lighthearted. "If she's spending time with humans, she's bound to get into some kind of trouble." Meanwhile, back on Earth, the training fields were buzzing with activity. Fren, a Ural specialist, landed face first into the fighting pit, rolling along in a brief ragdoll tumble as the sun beat down on her dull yellow fur. Pieces of her protective gear scattered around her as she groaned, trying to shake off the hit. Heimel, a fellow Ural, hissed out in sympathy, bringing his balled fists up near his chin. "I know that didn't feel good," he muttered, watching his friend struggle to get back on her feet. Zetan, another Ural, hummed in agreement, his tone tinged with concern. "She's getting pummeled out there," Zetan observed, his eyes narrowing as he watched Fren pick herself up, her movements slow and pained. Fren managed to retrieve her pugil stick, slipping her helmet back onto her head as she squared off against her opponent, Renee, human soldier who had been dominating the sparring session. Despite her smaller size, Renee moved with an impressive fluidity, her strikes powerful and precise. "Come on, furry, back up you come," Renee called out, her tone teasing as she twirled her pugil stick with a practiced ease. "Drill sergeant ain't going to let you off that easy." Fren muttered under her breath, brushing the sand from her face as she readied herself for another round. She had watched the humans dominate the other races during this kind of training, and while they were definitely toughening them up, it was still a struggle for the Ural and Poe. They were getting demolished by their human counterparts, and it was becoming increasingly clear that humans were, indeed, built differently. The Carlin at least were adapting, and the humans seemed to enjoy sparring with them. "I can't wait for the Jinn to join us," Fren called out, trying to boost her own morale as much as the others. "It's going to be cathartic watching them wipe those smiles off your faces." Renee and the other humans chuckled at Fren's bravado, but there was a camaraderie in their laughter. "As that may be, they ain't here yet," Renee replied, her tone good-natured but firm. "And you have to land 6 strikes on me in order to pass." Fren glanced over at the other pummeled members of her race, who were watching her intently. None of them had managed to pass either, and it was up to her to try and get them a win. She shook her head, refocusing on the task at hand, and stepped back into the fray with Renee. The next strike was quick, but Fren managed to barely duck it, ramming the head of her pugil stick into Renee's stomach. The impact caused Renee to stumble back a step, coughing out a laugh as she steadied herself. "Come on, Fren. Just 2 more," Heimel called out, slapping the wooden boards that made up the ring of the fighting pit. Zetan, watching from the sidelines, exchanged a look with another Carlin. "I see that I was right in assuming this would be easier for us," he remarked, his tone thoughtful. The other Carlin giggled, her tail flicking with amusement. "I believe them wrapping our tails in a pugil pad helps," she replied, her voice light. Zitan laughed, his eyes crinkling with amusement. Just as Zitan turned back to the fight, Renee, now visibly angry, spun her pugil stick around and lunged at Fren with surprising speed. Fren's guard was easily broken by the swift uppercut, sending her staggering backward with faltering steps before she crashed to the sand again. All the Ural hissed out in pain as Fren groaned from the ground, her tail wagging slightly in submission as she fumbled around in the sand, trying to find her pugil stick with warbling vision. Renee. A male human private called out, wiggling his finger back and forth reproachfully. That was too much, Renee scoffed, her frustration evident. She hit me, she protested, her tone defensive. She's supposed to hit you where she can, the private replied, crossing his arms. You were told not to hit them in the face, Renee opened her mouth to argue, but before she could get a word out, Fren's pugil stick bounced off her back. Renee turned around, confusion written all over her face, only to see Fren, wobbly but determined, still on her knees, her arms outstretched from the throw. Another female human private laughed, clapping her hands. You turned your back to an enemy, and she got you, Renee spat in frustration, throwing her pugil stick to the ground as she glared at Fren. All voices fell silent as Drill Sergeant Marshall stepped out from the shadows where she had been watching, the human recruits parting to make way for her. Her brown campaign hat caught the sun as she approached the pit. You let yourself be distracted while the Ypal stayed on mission, Drill Sergeant Marshall said, her tone even but laced with a hint of reprimand. She looked down at Fren, who was still on the ground, smiling up at her, despite the blood trickling from her nose and mouth. You are bleeding. Drill Sergeant Marshall said matter-of-factly, her gaze steady. Fren nodded, still smiling despite the pain. Aha, Drill Sergeant, she replied, her voice shaky but proud. You also took down a human in melee combat. How does that feel, Drill Sergeant Marshall asked, her tone curious. Fren blinked, her thoughts fuzzy from the hit. Like my face hurts, she admitted, spitting out a mouthful of blood into the sand. Drill Sergeant Marshall laughed. A genuine laugh that seemed to surprise even her. She reached down and hauled Fren up to her feet, her grip firm but not unkind. You never fail to impress me, Specialist Fren, she said, her tone filled with a mix of admiration and pride. Wait, Heimel shouted, clapping his hands in excitement. Promoted? She just got promoted. He took off at a run around the ring, his hands held high in celebration as he made a loop around the now cheering and battered Ural. Promoted, Heimel screamed again, making another loop of the ring and slapping at Zitten's arm as he passed. She did it. She's the first non-human promotion, Zitten, quickly tiring of the slapping, whacked Heimel with his still pugil pad-bearing tail. Be quiet, Heimel, he muttered, though there was a smile on his face. Promoted, Fren asked, her mind still buzzing from the uppercut, as Drill Sergeant Marshall studied her with a mix of amusement and pride. Huh? Why, Fren managed to say, her confusion evident. Drill Sergeant Marshall smiled down at her, her expression softening. Because you showed the right kind of metal, she explained. Her tone reverent as she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small black metal ring. The humans all called out in unison, their voices filled with respect and admiration. Steel souls, iron hearts, they shouted, the words ringing through the air as they half bowed in respect to Fren. Fren was still confused, her mind struggling to process what was happening. Drill Sergeant Marshall pulled off Fren's old rank from her right lapel, placing the new rank just into the cloth so it stayed. A soul of steel that cannot be broken, Drill Sergeant Marshall said reverently, her voice filled with a deep respect. Fren blinked up at her, trying to make sense of the situation. She would have smiled if not for the pain, but before she could react, Drill Sergeant Marshall reared her fist back. Ha, Fren managed to say, her confusion deepening. Drill Sergeant Marshall's fist slammed into Fren's chest, driving the metal pins of her new rank into her collarbones. Fren let out a screech of agony, her hands curling in pain as she instinctively pulled on her lapel, jerking the pins out of her body. Drill Sergeant Marshall chuckled, holding Fren steady as she placed the guards onto the now bloody pins. She's official now, lads, Drill Sergeant Marshall called out, her voice filled with pride as she pushed the still hissing and spitting Fren toward the other human recruits. Steel and iron, they cheered, whooping and hollering as they hefted the still cursing Fren into the air. The other races clapped and whistled at Fren, their admiration for her clear. Fren, despite the pain, couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. She had done it, she had earned their respect, and in that moment, the pain didn't matter. She was one of them now, and that was all that mattered. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says we will heart every single one of them, Thank you for your time.